coming up this week.
It's all a dot on the horizon, right? And it's how do we build bridges to get to that dot or enable pieces of that future sooner than later, right? And that's what we're focused on is building those bridges, simplifying the EV industry, and empowering the driver to be able to make the decisions that they want to make.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 192 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. This week, I'm speaking with Kyle Amman, the Director of EV Development over at Parkopedia. They are the leading connected service provider focusing on parking, charging, fueling, and tolling for vehicles all over the world. Kyle, it's an absolute pleasure to have you join me. I know we're going to get into a lot of great conversation about how Parkopedia really supports EVs and the growing transition to an electric future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Obviously, we're talking about my favorite subject, EV. So I'm happy to dive down some rabbit holes. Hopefully, we can keep it pretty on track, though.
Sure. So before we really dive into all of that, I always like to give my guests an opportunity to speak to their background a little bit and how you got to your current position of where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I never really would have considered myself to be a car guy, but I kind of got pulled into the automotive business. Been in it for 10, coming up on 15 years now, actually, in the automotive business. Started in the retail sales area and then moving up and on. I really dove into EV with Canoe, which was an EV startup. And that's where I really found my passion for EV, and then moved over to Parkopedia in the last year or so. With really wanting to focus on the ecosystems and how we improve the EV driving experience for everybody.
Certainly, Parkopedia is fairly well known. What are the things within the EV space that Parkopedia finds that they're most focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it comes down to really two things. One, simplifying solutions for the OEMs, making sure that we have solutions that work for them and enable them. And second, and probably more importantly, really improving the driver experience, which is just going to be great for the industry. It's great for the world. It's really what we want to focus on is driver experience to drive adoption.
Yes. Well, the more people enjoy driving an EV, the more people naturally will want to be driving an EV. What are the things that you're able to do to improve that experience for drivers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we look at simplifying things for the OEMs and improving the driver experience, we really got to take it all the way back to the barriers to entry, right? Because generally speaking, once people purchase an EV, they're very happy with their purchase. They enjoy driving an EV. So it's all about getting over these barriers to adoption. And what we've found is that most barriers to adoption can be, in fact, impacted or influenced by discovery and transactions, which is really what Parkopedia is known for. So if we break down some of the top barriers, I'm not going to go in a particular order, but we'll say the top five are generally the top five, the bottom five are generally the bottom five. You look at things like lack of infrastructure, right? So lack of infrastructure is really two parts. So the first part is getting more metal on the ground, getting more chargers installed. And between the government and the CPOs, they're doing a great job of continuing to drive and get more and more chargers in the ground. But a charger in the ground doesn't help a driver if they can't find it, right? So what we really focus on is that discovery piece. How do we make sure that drivers have access to all those chargers and it's at their fingertips, right? Because you can't just use one app, you can't just use the Tesla app or the EVgo app or the Electrify America app or anything like that, because they all have smaller portions of the segment. So if you look at Tesla, they're roughly about half or so of the total industry. If you put them aside, because technically they're still a closed network and there's a lot of question marks around what the future looks like with Tesla, especially this week, then when you get to the open networks, the biggest players have like 20 to 25% of the market share. There's three big players, whether you're looking at level 2 or DC fast chargers. And then you have a whole bunch of small players that make up the other 20 to 30% of the market. How do you bring all that together and put it all in one place for the drivers? And that one place really should be the head unit of the vehicle, right? And Parkopedia helps empower that. That's just one of the barriers, right? If you look at like range anxiety, again, that comes down to discovery. It's not so much that people are concerned about, how much range they have. It's, hey, am I going to find a charger in time? And is it going to work when I get there? Right. And that's all discovery. That's instilling confidence and making sure that the drivers are able to find what they need to find, and that they have the information they need when they get there. Another one's going to be access to chargers. Really, this is equal parts discovery and transaction. So when they get to a charger, is it going to be available for them, or will it be behind a locked gate? And then on the transaction side, will they be able to make a payment? I think I saw something somewhat recently that said that the average EV driver has between 4 and 5 apps, some as many as 9 apps to be able to facilitate their charging. Having a question mark of whether or not your app's going to work when you get there is a concern for drivers. So, here at Parkopedia, we're trying to aggregate all that data, aggregate all that information to make sure that we have great discovery and great transactions. Some other barriers that are in there that we impact is going to be vehicle cost. We don't talk about it enough as an industry, I feel. With an ICE vehicle, you have your vehicle, the cost of the vehicle itself is primarily the driving cost. With EVs, it's a little bit different. The cost of ownership goes down significantly when you look at charging, and more specifically where they charge and getting good rates on charging, as well as maintenance and some other pieces as well. Lack of maintenance, again, comes down to a discovery issue. I don't think most consumers, most drivers really care about what the maintenance plan is on a charger. What they care about is that it's working when it gets there, and that they have that information at their fingertips. Is it going to be working when I get there, or won't it be working when I get there? That, again, comes right back to discovery. And then the last one I look at on the list of top 10 or so is going to be EV ready homes, which again is equal parts concerned. Hey, can I charge at home? But can I charge my car is the real question. Do I have access to charging? People don't care that they don't have a gas pump at their home. So it's about giving the same type of confidence and the ability to find and pay for charging for EV drivers, no matter where they live or what options they have available to them.
Wow, you have thrown a lot at us. So I wrote down a couple questions because I wanted to make sure that I understand things properly. When you're saying to aggregate data related to where chargers are, if they're operational or not, but you said that should be in car. Are you talking about directly integrating into the software of the vehicle, or are you talking about a separate app that would be like the one app to rule them all?
Yeah, I think it can be both, and I think that it's kind of a dot on the horizon type of thing, right? If you look at the perfect future and what we're working towards, the vehicle should be telling you where you're going. It should be telling you where to charge. It should really be simplifying everybody's lives for them. How we get there is we build bridges, and sometimes that involves apps. But Parkopedia's real focus is getting all this information in dash of the vehicle as quickly as possible. In dash is where our parking information lives right now, and it's where EV charging and transactions information should live as well.
Okay. More people will use an in-car feature, if you will, than, like you said, we already have enough apps. I don't think there's any EV drivers that want more apps to handle how they interact with various networks. So definitely aggregating and consolidating that information is important. When it comes to how all of that's done, you had mentioned working with OEMs. I imagine that would be very difficult because not all the OEMs are on the same page, and many of them use completely different software to manage the car and work with the user interface.
Yeah. OEMs are a huge topic, right? And you make a lot of great points there. The way I look at OEMs is they are big ships that are going very specific directions in the ocean, right? Like they don't turn, they don't move quickly, but they get where they're going, and they're very efficient about how they get there and what they do with it, right? So, working with the OEMs is difficult because they have, long lead times for solutions they're bringing in. Typically a sales cycle for us with an OEM is, 12 to 18 months, but implementation could be 3 or 4 years out, right? There's OEMs I'm talking to today about their 2028 EV solutions, right? Okay. So they plan very far in advance, but that means you have to be very forward thinking with your solutions, and you have to be ready to adapt from the supplier level, because the OEM is making their commitments early on.
I would imagine that's a challenge as well as a positive, because you have more time to work out any bugs or kinks before it gets faced with the consumer. But then also, it takes so long that you don't know necessarily what changes are going to be needed to make between now and, you had said, 2028. So
Yep.
I imagine where you start, the idea and plan that you have in how that will integrate might change throughout the
Yeah.
process by the time you finally get to the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said before, not all OEMs are the same, right? Like OEMs and vehicles are really an extension of personality, and they have been for a long time. That's not new, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just the style and how they look anymore, which used to be the extension of personality. Now it's the software that's provided and the experience that they provide and how far they extend into your ecosystem just outside of a vehicle, right? You look at some OEMs, some domestic, some foreign, are looking at how they become your energy provider, how they become your cell phone provider, how they do all these other pieces for you. For us, we're very heavy on the data side. We support and we have great partners that work on the UI, UX side and all those other things. But what we are is we're the plumbing and we're the data, and we're the solution enabler, if you will. So we work through a lot of other tier one suppliers, as well as us being a tier one supplier. But yeah, we work with the new startup OEMs that are coming through, but typically their focus is more on the vehicle itself. And they're not quite at the maturity level of looking through all of the smaller details of user experience. So we mostly work with the largest manufacturers today, but we're open to working with everybody, of course.
I want to shift a little bit and talk about what Parkopedia has to offer that helps EV drivers outside of the vehicle experience, but interact with the world around them to make lives easier in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going through this transition. We're going through a lot of transitions right now, in how we look at things and how we interact, right? So, the way we think about fueling right now is we don't really think about it. Then you get, when you need fuel, you stop, you fill up. And in our minds, that's like an instantaneous process, but it's really not. So when we go and we stop, we typically go inside. I think it's something like 53 or 54% of Americans will go inside and buy something from the convenience store.
Mm-hmm.
A lot will go to the bathroom, do other things. So ultimately, it ends up being like a 10 to 15-minute process, anyways. But we don't really think of it that way. We think of fueling as instantaneous. As we go through, and people my age and probably the people that are older than me probably aren't going to come around to this as much. But we need to transition our thought process from being, hey, it's an instantaneous fueling process to it's all part of the journey, right? So when you look at dining in Europe or South America, the other places, it's an experience, right? You go there to dine and it's a 2 or 3 hour thing. That's what you're doing for the evening.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at dining in America, it's how quickly can we shovel food into our faces so we can go on to the next thing, right? So when we start slowing these things down and start looking at it being a journey and being an experience, then we start looking at, well, with charging, is it really a negative thing that it's going to take you 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes to charge? Or is it a positive thing? And we need to start creating the experiences around that. And most importantly, we need to let the drivers know that those experiences exist, right? So you're not necessarily just picking a charger to go to, you're picking an experience to go to. And that mostly applies to road trips, but it also applies to doing your shopping or going to your dry cleaner or whatever else, right? It's all about the destination and how the destination impacts the experience. Here at Parkopedia, we're really focused on amenities, right? Photos, ratings, reviews, amenities, enabling the drivers to have that information to be able to make good decisions as they're going through and finding their chargers.
Yeah, the current EV charging experience, at least here in the United States, is very much off in the corner of a parking lot. Maybe it's lit, maybe not. And you've got to walk a football field to get to a bathroom if there is one, or grab a drink or whatever. And yeah, that's one of the things I think about a lot when I'm looking towards where EV charging needs to go, is to have that experience. Level two stations typically are what people expect to find at destinations, right? Where maybe it's their hotel or at a restaurant or at a shopping center. When we're talking about times of 15 to 30 minutes, of course, we're not talking about level two. We're talking about DC fast chargers. Most people do not have the conversations where DC fast charging should be an experience. So, what is Parkopedia doing to help shift the conversation or the mindset about that? Because it's not just from the consumer side that needs to be adjusted, as you pointed out. It's going to be the CPOs or anybody that's installing the infrastructure, that also changes how they approach it.
Yeah. And again, we only operate in one area of this, like you pointed out, right? It's not necessarily Parkopedia's responsibility to make sure there's a playground at every
Of course.
DC
Yeah.
charging station. But it is part of our responsibilities to make sure, again, part of discovery, that users understand what's there. Do they have the ability to go walk on a trail? Do they have the ability to get a coffee? What is going to be there? Because if you're driving, let's say you're on a road trip and, you want to stop to charge, it's going to be 20 to 25 minutes. You may just want to go to the bathroom. You may need a coffee. It may be time to stop for dinner. There's a lot of different things you can do, and that might dictate where you stop to charge. And providing that information as part of the discovery piece is really what we're focused on at Parkopedia.
Typically, where is it that you all are gathering the information from?
Yeah, great question. So the data comes and typically starts from the CPOs, right? So getting the dynamic data from the CPOs, that's going to be your baseline of information. But then we have a lot of dedicated people and dedicated systems that are designed to go through and clean and enhance that data, right? So one thing that we find with CPO data that we get is that roughly 30% of the data we get is wrong. And the biggest issue, I know it's a staggering number.
Wow. Yeah, that's a too big of a number.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. But it's not necessarily the CPO's fault. I'll explain here in a second.
Okay.
We'll get to that. So I'm not bashing on the CPOs. But roughly 30% of their data is wrong. So the biggest problem we typically find is going to be lat longs. Just location is incorrect, right? And if the location is incorrect, then your drivers can't find it. That's an absolute failure on discovery, and that's way more basic than like understanding if there's coffee and other stuff there. Like that's an enhancement, whereas just being able to find the location itself is a basic right, a basic function of it. And like I said, roughly 30% of those are incorrect. So we have over 100 people that go through and manually clean data for us. We also have a number of AI and systems approaches to be able to get that data and to be able to cleanse that data, resulting in a better experience. I said before, it's not the CPO's fault, because it's really not, right? When you look at our CPOs, especially in America, and I like to keep everything US focused, I like to focus on whichever area we're focusing on. For here, it's going to be US. The CPO's job has not been to provide great user experiences. It's been to put more metal on the ground, get more chargers out there. That's how we grade them. When you talk about a CPO, the quality of that CPO, first and foremost, is how many chargers do they have and how many chargers are working, right? When they go through and they use third-party companies to install the chargers, that person's going to be on a tablet when they're entering all the information to upload it to the CPO. Maybe they go across the street to grab a bite to eat while they upload their information. And now all of a sudden the chargers end up on the wrong side of the street. That's literally an example from last week that I was looking at. We pulled up a random example when we were talking to a customer, because they wanted to see what was going on with these lat longs. And sometimes it's, the entrance is wrong. Sometimes it's the wrong side of the street. Sometimes it's off by a long distance. But this particular one, the chargers were over on one side of the street, it's divided highway. And then on the other side of the street, where the chargers are saying they're located, is a restaurant, and it's right on the patio of the restaurant, right? So you can tell, like, pretty obvious the scenario here is someone went over there, they're uploading their information, and they're looking at a lat long. They don't think it makes a difference,
Sure.
and then the data's wrong, right? So it's their job to make sure they're installing chargers, and it's our job to make sure that all the information that goes to the drivers is correct.
That is quite the undertaking. I mean, you had mentioned that you've got 100 people manually going through this along with the AI and systems. But even then, it with the increased, hopefully increased pace of infrastructure development and installations, it that is only going to be more of a challenge. It's not something that's going to necessarily become easier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's just the first time we were looking at that long. Then there's a lot of other pieces to aggregation, right? So there's three different pieces to aggregation that you have to focus on. So the first one's going to be the technical piece, actually getting all the data in there, making sure the data is correct. That includes cleansing the data, going through all that stuff. The second piece is going to be operational, right? So as an industry, it's extremely volatile right now. You're looking at, I think when I started tracking this stuff a couple of years ago, 2, 3 years ago, we were in like the low to mid 30s for number of CPOs. I looked at the end of last year, it was 52. I heard someone the other day say it's at 65 now. So the number of CPOs that we have is increasing at a dramatic rate, which is good. We're getting more people involved. It's the right people that are getting involved. But at the same time as you have all these CPOs popping up, you have, Goliaths and everyone else within the industry that are really struggling financially, right? And some of them are closing up shop, right? So
Yeah.
there's this whole operational aggregation piece where those chargers don't just stop working, right? They get sold to somebody else or whatever else happens. So there's all this work that needs to go on behind the scenes to make sure that we're showing the correct chargers with the correct companies and all these other pieces. And then the last piece is going to be contractual, right? Look at 65 companies having 65 different contracts with 50 different OEMs. That is an absolute nightmare of an undertaking, and nothing will be consistent. User experience will not be consistent. So the other thing that Parkopedia helps with is contractual aggregations and really looking at like a one-to-many approach. And we do that on both sides, right? So many CPOs coming into one Parkopedia, one Parkopedia going out to many OEMs. And really cleans up everything within the industry.
I could see where that by having you all as that middle ground can absolutely, well, first of all, ensure that data is a little more accurate.
Yep.
But then also, as things change, to your point, where if a charger is sold to another company or is being operated by somebody else all of a sudden, well, if all they need to do is update Parkopedia and you then update it in your system and then that gets sent out to all of the vehicles that are connected, that's much more of a simple process than really any alternative that I can think of right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of the value there's a lot of different pieces that have value to Parkopedia, but the one-to-many approach is something that really helps support and drive the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about cleansing data, one thing that I'm really excited about is not only just cleansing that static data, like, hey, what's the lat long? Where's it at? Is the tariff correct? All the stuff that's really simple. But getting into how we cleanse dynamic data and really making sure that we're empowering drivers to be able to make sure they're making the best decisions. That can be it can be predictability for when chargers are going to be available. It can be charger user rating scores. If you have a charger that's constantly breaking, what does that look like? It could be other things, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can enhance the dynamic data as well. And those are things that we're focused on here at Parkopedia.
That is very much something that, even if it was partly automated, where if a car tried to plug in or was successful in one part of the process but not in another, and that is getting very deep into the weeds when it comes to data, those specific metrics. But I would imagine that if part of that was automatic, where you didn't have to rely on a user rating, you automatically knew, hey, in the last week, these 10 charging sessions failed and they had to either leave entirely or move to a different connector.
Exactly.
that is definitely something that has a lot of value in future users of a charging site being aware of, or the car through Parkopedia being aware of and not even recommending to go to that charger.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like reliability scores, right? So we know when a car tries to start charging. We know when a car stops charging. We know when it moves to the next charger over. It's very easy for us to take all this data and say, hey, listen, there's been 10 cars that have pulled up to this charger. None of them started charging. They all tried. Then they went over to this other charger and they started charging just fine there, right? Okay.
Mhm.
We know that that charger isn't working right now. We can take that offline. And as we have other cars that are pulling up to it and it starts working again, we can pull that back online, right? So if you have a pool of 10 chargers, it's really easy for us to take that pool down to 9 or to 8, depending on what the vehicle interactions have looked like with chargers, right? And that's just one small piece of it. There'd be many other components that would go into it. But when we get down to aggregation of the fact that it's one to many, we work with many CPOs, we work with many vehicles. We can go through and we have that data to be able to make those recommendations.
One of the most valuable pieces of information for somebody who is driving an EV using chargers when it doesn't work would be to know, is it the car that is essentially the part that's failing in the communication process or whatever's going on, or is it the charger? I speak with a lot of people in the industry, both on the OEM side as well as the CPO side, and there seems to be a lot of consumer confusion when maybe the charger is working just fine, but there's an issue with the car. They don't know that. So a lot of the time the consumer responds in a way that isn't addressing the most appropriate concern in that situation.
Yeah.
You all are positioned to essentially identify what's going on and potentially in car give a message to the user that lets them know, hey, here's what's going on. That will, I mean, that alone would just dramatically improve so much about the entire experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what the future looks like and what features we bring online. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see what's going to be most impactful, what's
Sure.
going to happen, but I think there's a lot of different options out there. One thing we do want to be careful about is not overstepping, right? The last thing I want to do is say a charger is working when it's not working, right? And to your point, because we have multiple brands, multiple models, maybe the Ford isn't working with maybe one vehicle isn't working with one CPO at that given time, but we can see other ones are. But it's all about the balancing act of making sure we're empowering and enabling the consumers, but also protecting the interests of the OEMs and the CPOs as well. So it's all
Yeah.
just about clarity,
Well, having access to that much data is power. And we know with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah.
I love being able to throw little lines in there like that.
A little Spider-Man quote. It's great.
So ultimately, your customer is the OEMs, but then also the CPOs. And who else?
So the way I like to look at it is it's the customer, the people that are paying our bills are really the OEMs, right? So when we look at customer, it's the OEMs. But the end user, the driver, the people behind it are really what's important. The reason why we're doing this is for the people, for the drivers. And then the CPOs and EMSPs, which they're different, especially outside of the US,
Let's
are
go
our
ahead and
partners, right?
actually break that down for people. I just realized that we didn't explain CPO or so let's before we get further, let's go
Yeah.
ahead and tell everybody what those acronyms stand for.
Yeah. So CPO is going to be the charge point operator. So that's going to be, think of that as the physical metal in the ground, the people that, we're going to simplify a little bit because there's also CSOs, but the people that the chargers that are in the ground that you physically go and you look at and interact with, right? So they're the people that operate those chargers and deliver electrons to you. EMSP is going to be the e-mobility service provider. And that's going to be the people that facilitate the payment or the transaction, right? So in the US, every CPO is effectively an EMSP. So it's a CPO with an EMSP sitting on top of it, and then it goes out to the customer. So think of the EMSP as your app, essentially. In Europe, it's very different, which is why we like to talk about it. In the US, it will change. The US is going to not necessarily follow the European model, but it'll go into a more EMSP heavy model here in the next few years, I think. But in Europe, the EMSPs, there's thousands of EMSPs that are all operating different apps with different lists of CPOs on it. Yeah.
I want to dig into that a little bit further. How do you see that change happening here, and what, from an end user perspective, if I'm driving my car and I'm going to use a charger, what will be different about that experience as that changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think first we should point out the benefits and the problems with the EMSP model in Europe, right? And I'm going to way oversimplify, so please don't roast me on this, guys. But the benefits in the European model with all the EMSPs is drivers have more access to more chargers through one app or a couple of apps, right? They can have one or two apps, and it can facilitate finding and paying for all the chargers they need to in their area, right? Which is great. The problem is, in order to do this, there's all these different stops in the chain before it gets to the user. So from CPO to user, there's a lot more stops in there. And that all those different stops are different companies that need to make money. So the end cost ends up getting significantly higher. So there's one example we have. I'm going to butcher the numbers here. So my apologies, but generally speaking, they'll be correct. Where if you buy the energy from the CPO, which is the base, where it should be the cheapest, it's, let's say, 40 cents per kilowatt hour. However, if you buy it from one specific EMSP, which also happens to be the utility provider that is providing the power to that CPO, it's actually cheaper. It's only 35 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, if you go all the way to the end of the chain after it's bumped through a whole bunch of different people and gets to somebody at the end of one of these apps, it can be as high as $1 per kilowatt hour or over $1 per kilowatt hour. So it can go up by double, almost triple the cost because of all the different pieces of the chain that it has to go through.
Sure.
So Europe was a bit more advanced, still is a bit more advanced than the US as far as EV adoption and the CPO and EMSP model. So the US had the luxury of seeing where this fails a little bit, right? So they were able to see, okay, if you just open this up to everybody, then the value chain goes out the window. It's really expensive for the drivers. That's going to negatively impact the experience, both for us as CPOs and for the drivers. Not a great solution. So the US CPOs have been very resistant to adopting that model and giving their data and allowing access to be able to do that. Now they're loosening up in the last year or so, but generally speaking, the cooperation and the ability to work through this stuff has been resistant. And I wouldn't say that's all negative. I think they've been doing it for good reasons, right? Now, the question is, get all the way back to your question you asked a few minutes ago, my apologies, is how do we see that changing in the US? Well, I think we're going to see that changing, most simply with OEMs becoming more EMSPs, right? So OEMs are generally speaking probably going to become EMSPs, or there's going to be a solution like Parkopedia solution where we can do single sign-on and aggregate all that into one area. But there's going to be other EMSPs that pop up as well. Just the way American society works. I'm going to use a complete fictitious example here. Please do not quote me. I'm making it up on purpose. But let's say Amex wants to make its own EMSP, right? So they would go through, they would aggregate all this data, the transaction fees, and now you could buy all your charging through your Amex portal. And it's going to give you more points, but it's going to cost you a little bit more money, right? So we can go down this model where there's like discount programs or reward programs or other stuff. And that's more the model I see our EMSP route going, not where it necessarily increases the cost of the consumer, but adds an ancillary benefit. And that ancillary benefit might come with a subscription fee or something else.
That's a lot. Hold on. Let me take it in. So Parkopedia would also be looking to help facilitate the financial transaction of EV charging.
Yeah, so that's a core piece of what we do, right? So transactions are really important to us. Really, what we are, our platform is aggregation and transaction orchestration. Those are the two things we do. Now, we don't want to be the merchant of record. We don't want to be the person that you're actually paying. We just want to make sure that we're enabling all the plumbing to give drivers all the options they have available to them, right? So with parking right now, that primarily is, going to be what we would call remote start in the EV business, right?
Mhm.
So being able to click a button in your head unit and it pays for your parking garage scans your license plate, you go right in, right? You don't have to interact with the terminal or anything. We can do the same thing with remote start in Dash for charging. And then the next phase of it really comes down to, plug and charge, right? And what
Yeah.
that looks. So at Parkopedia, we're really focused on simplifying the transaction piece, right? Being able to let the user be able to make preference-based decisions in order to have the charging automatically enable form or whatever they have to do, without having to go through 9 different apps or figure out all these other different things. We're all about just giving options to the driver and making sure that they're empowered.
Whenever I'm speaking with somebody new, my mind goes to application of what we're talking about.
Sure.
That's the way my mind works. And so with everything that you said, I'm thinking, gosh, if I was the owner of a parking garage that had EV charging inside the parking garage, Parkopedia would be the perfect solution to manage all of that, where anybody that is driving in, hopefully they would have a Parkopedia account. Like you said, the license plate could get scanned, or any other way that the person and car could be identified. That would already be connected to their account. And
Yep.
then everything would be paid for through that. And then ultimately, I, as the business owner providing the charging and parking solution, would then get paid.
It's even simpler than that, right? So let's put this into a world where it's your vehicle, right? So your vehicle is your wallet. So
Mhm.
what type of vehicle do you have? That way I'm not.
Tesla Model 3.
Okay, so you're a Tesla Model 3, right? So the dot on the horizon, which we already enable nearly all of this. But the goal is, so you have your Tesla Model 3, you pull up to a parking garage. Doesn't matter if you have an account with them. Parkopedia can create an account on the fly for you. That's part of our single sign-on solution, right? So we can create an account on the fly. You can pay for your parking and for your charging all in one transaction. Like combine the two. You know you're going to go there. You know you're going to park. You know you're going to charge. You know how long you're going to be there for. You can put all that in. It can be one simple solution. Hit one button. You pull up, gate goes up, you go in, you go to your charger, you charge, right? Like that's the dot on the horizon. Like all the
Okay,
pieces are there for that. We already have everything there. The harder part is getting everybody to work together, and get it all enabled, right?
sure. What is the benefit as a business owner that Parkopedia provides that makes that something that they would want to be a part of, and help make that a possibility for essentially the end user going through that system?
Yeah. It's all about increased channel, right? So for us, we're not trying to charge that parking operator or anybody else any money to do this stuff. Like we're just trying to enable everything for the drivers.
Mhm.
So there's really no downside to it for the parking operator, or anybody involved in the solution. Other than, sometimes people want to own the customer. They see all this value in owning the customer, which again, we're fine with the Parkopedia because we have the single sign-on solution. We can create accounts on demand, right? And let me rewind back a little bit. So what that looks like is, since you have your Tesla, you go through and you put your credit card information into your Tesla, and there'll be, some legal notices that go through and say, hey, listen, do you want to sign up for single sign-on? We can create accounts for you on demand at any retailers you need to go to, blah, 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 right? So you click the button for that. And then you're pulling up to stuff. We're creating accounts for you. We're combining it all in. Everyone's getting paid their rack rates, the rates they charge to anybody else. It's really a very simple solution. And it just helps accelerate the industry, helps accelerate adoption via driver experience.
Yeah, I can see where ultimately, as you had said, your car being your wallet would have numerous, almost endless benefits to wherever you take your car that needs to pay for things. Another thing that popped into my head was just going through a drive-through at a fast food restaurant. Maybe as soon as the order is typed in, the restaurant network is communicating with the car via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and everything just gets paid directly through there, and we don't have to actually hand somebody through a window a card or cash or anything like that.
Yeah. Maybe
Uh,
you don't even have to order, right? Everyone makes fun of me. I have this whole like, what does the dot on the horizon look like for me? But maybe your car does the ordering for you, right? As we're going through and we're developing AI, we're developing autonomous driving and everything else. Why do you even have to go to the drive-through? Why do you have to place the order yourself? Why can't the vehicle do all this stuff for you digitally, right? It can do the transaction, it can take you there. Everything can be done via the vehicle in the not so distant future. Like all the technical pieces line up for all that. It
mhm,
all comes down to aggregation. It
sure.
all comes down to the businesses getting on the same page and all that stuff.
I gotta ask, when you say not too distant future, what are you thinking of there?
Again, I operate on dots on a horizon because when you start saying these things, it's really difficult. And to put things in perspective, I'm not sure if how old your audience is, right? But for me, if I was sitting here having a conversation back in the early to mid '90s, first off, we wouldn't be sitting here on a computer, right? We'd be doing this face to face because FaceTime wouldn't exist. And if someone asked, hey, what are two things that you think is going to happen in the next 10 years, and I said, hey, I think there's going to be a skateboard that's going to fly, and I think that there's going to be a device I can put in my pocket that allows me to have instant face-to-face communication with anybody in the world. They would tell me I'm crazy for the instant communication face to face, and that the flying skateboard is going to come in the next 2 to 3 years, right? Like that's what everyone
Right.
would think, right? So when we talk about the future, it's so hard to put dates on things. So I like to talk on dots on the horizon, but ultimately that thing is just a combination of AI, which AI is perfectly capable of placing an order for somebody right now. Like it's capable of me telling it something and then it doing what I asked it to do.
Yes.
Autonomous driving, not that far off, right? Like technically we're capable of it. Is it safe? Is it where it needs to be right now? I think that's up for debate, and we're not going to have that debate here today. But we're definitely making advancements. And if we wanted to put a bunch of additional resources towards it, I'm sure we could solve it, in the next couple of years, but let's say it'll definitely get solved in the next decade. And then the only other piece of it is putting all the pieces together, the business development piece of it, right? Connecting all those ecosystems. And that's probably the hardest part of all of it, is just connecting all those ecosystems. But that's exactly what we're doing here at Parkopedia.
Well, when looking towards the future, we do have the benefit of building the future that we want to see. And it sounds like you and, of course, everybody else that is working at Parkopedia really have an idea of a future that is enabling life to be so much simpler for people who are using vehicles. And I'm
Yep.
choosing my words there very specifically because I don't want to say owning or driving vehicles, because
Yeah.
let's leave it open. The future, we
Yeah.
might not own vehicles, and we will probably not be the ones that are actually driving them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Again, it's all a dot on the horizon, right? And it's how do we build bridges to get to that dot or enable pieces of that future sooner than later, right? And that's what we're focused on is building those bridges, simplifying the EV industry, and empowering the driver to be able to make the decisions that they want to make.
That is really, really exciting. And certainly, as much as I love driving, that is a future that I can get behind because it makes everybody's life so much easier. Where if you just remove the little things, we don't have to worry or think or use money, time, and energy to do all of this. Well, now, as a human race, we can take that money, time, and energy and apply it in more important areas.
Like watching cat videos.
We'll never get enough of that, ever.
No, No, I completely agree, right? It's more efficient, a more efficient use of our time to not need to do the things that we don't need to do, right? I agree completely.
In the very, very near future, you all are going to be at the ACT Expo. So I want to give you an opportunity to share about what people can expect to see if they're going to be there. And honestly, even if they miss being there in person, if there's a way they can connect with Parkopedia and follow along with what you all are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be at ACT, super excited about ACT. Reach out if you want to have a conversation about anything, just reach out to us at Parkopedia, parkopedia.com. We have our contact information on there. We have some announcements that are coming up this week, so I don't want to steal the thunder from the marketing team of those announcements that are coming out.
Darn.
But we'll be talking about a number of those things. We'll be hosting a breakfast. So really excited about ACT. We're excited about the EV industry. Do you have you been to ACT previously? Are you going this
I
year?
have not, and I'm bummed I'm not going to be able to make it this year either, but it is one of the major shows that happen in the US that is definitely on my radar for big time.
Yeah. ACT is definitely, it's my favorite time of the year, right? We come together, the panels and everything are great. We get to talk about all the great things that have come along for the last year, things that we see coming forward, and then also talk about what we can do to change the industry and progress things forward. So it's a great opportunity for the industry, and I'm really excited to see what announcements and what comes from it next week.
So before we end the podcast, I always like to ask two questions of my guests. And if you haven't watched any of the other interviews all the way to the end, then you wouldn't know this, and I prefer that. So that would be great. The first question is, what do you drive?
I currently drive. I have a Ford Mach-E and a Tesla Model 3, so I have both. Normally, I have an ICE vehicle in as well, but I've been trying to cut a few back, where I can. They both are outstanding vehicles in their own right. Yeah.
The very last question is a play on the word drive, where instead of what do you drive, I like to ask what drives you. So when you wake up in the morning, what is the primary factor that influences how you want to live your life?
That's a good question. So I think if you went through and you counted the number of times I said specific words in this podcast, you could be able to figure that out on your own. But instead, I'm going to tell you two stories.
Okay.
So my first story is going to be about my grandmother. So my grandmother got a Prius, the second version of Prius. So she had a Prius for 10 plus years now, right? And I was talking to her, that's probably about a year ago now, and I was like, hey, why don't we get you an EV? And she's like, oh no, I can't do that. I'd never be able to figure out how to charge it. I would get stranded. She was genuinely concerned. And this is someone that was an early adopter of the hybrid and the EV lifestyle, really excited about it. I know she wants an EV, but she is terrified of the charging experience. Keep in mind, she's had that car for 10, 15 years. I'm not sure how long at this point. It probably has 25,000 miles on it. She would never in her life have to plug in anywhere other than at home. But just what she understands about the industry and what about the vehicles has put her into a position where she does not feel empowered to be able to purchase an EV, right? The second thing about my sister. Me and my sister were at something, again, maybe a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And I'm not going to say what type of EV she has, but she has an EV. And we were driving home. We're leaving this place around like 6 o'clock at night. We're going to drive back up to our hometown. And it's about a 3-hour drive or so. And she was like, hey, can you take my car and I'll take your car? I brought an ICE vehicle with me at the time. And I was like, no, why would you want to do that? She's like, honestly, I just don't feel comfortable. Like, I know where I have to stop. I don't feel comfortable stopping there at night. Like, I'll stay here the night and I'll drive tomorrow. If that's my only option, right? So of course I traded cars with her. I drove her car, stopped at the charger, the only charger that was available to stop at, and she was 100% right. Like, it was behind, like, it was not in a great place. It was not lit at all, completely dark. It just was not a good experience.
Yeah.
So what really drives me is empowering people to be able to do what they want to do, and then simplifying that experience for them. So empowerment and simplification.
I am going to write that down because I think so many people probably feel the same way that you do. I've run into that in the EV industry. It's very parallel where so many people are trying to address the overall challenge, but coming from different angles. But empowering consumer adoption of electric vehicles in many ways is what the biggest challenge is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where the people that have already bought EVs, that group didn't need much convincing. You just told them, hey, these are really great at these things. And if that was important to them, they bought it.
There's this analogy I've used a few times now, and I think it really resonates with people. And that's that, the people that bought an EV up until about 2020 or so, they were really pioneers, right? So they were people that they bought an EV because they wanted to do something new. They wanted to do something exciting. They knew that there was going to be issues. They knew that there was going to be pain points, but they did it because, either they wanted to save the world or, whatever else, but they did it for all the reasons, knowing that there's going to be issues.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're in like the settler age, right? So like people that get vehicles from 2020 till now, maybe another year or two from now, are people buying the vehicles, understanding that they're going to be trade-offs, but generally expect their quality of life to be the same with their vehicles. And that's what they're looking for, right? And then the last one is what I like to refer to as the homeowners associations. And those are the people that are going to be buying the vehicles 2 years from now for the following 10 years and beyond. And they're the ones that expect everything to be better, right? So when we talked about all those barriers to adoption in the beginning, those barriers are not stagnant. They're not static.
Right.
They are continuously growing as we go forward. So we can't be planning for what makes a consumer happy today. We have to be planning for what makes a consumer happy 5 years from now. And that is incredibly difficult to do. Sorry, that's my last tangent, the last rabbit hole I'll jump down with you.
Well, I cannot think about a better way to tie all of this together, because what you just said very much is how I understand Parkopedia approaching the future, where you're not thinking about today only or next year. You are looking 5, 10, 15 years down the road at what the consumer will want and what will make their lives better. And to be completely honest, I don't think there's any better way of approaching this, even though that does mean that the challenges are so much greater. It also means that the value of what you're able to provide is equally as great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kyle, if somebody is an OEM or a CPO or a business site where they have something that they offer that Parkopedia can improve this process, what's a good way for them to reach out?
Yeah, great question. So business.parkopedia.com is going to be the best place for them to start at. Also, we do have a number of social tags. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. We do all the other socials as well.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've had an awesome time talking with you, and I know that everybody that either watches or listens to this is going to have enjoyed it just as much as I have. So yeah, I guess we'll just end it with that. So thank you so much for joining me. Yeah,
thanks for having me. This has been great. I'm always happy to talk EV.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe to wherever you like to watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're looking to stay plugged into the EV community, head over to ev-resource.com for the very best educational resources, community connections, EV reviews, and a whole lot more. The EV Resource Podcast is a production of EV Resource and is supported by viewers and listeners just like you. Members of the EV Resource Patreon family are, at the Director tier, Rajeev, Narayan, and Andy Cooper. At the Executive Producer tier, Christopher Lawrence. If you're interested in ad-free episodes of the podcast, EV Resource merchandise, support recognition, and more, head over to patreon.com/EVResource. If you have any feedback, please email hello@ev-resource.com and put podcast feedback in the subject line. I've been your host, Zach Hurst. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time.